In contrast to the first approach of communication within organizations, I want to offer an alternative, more sophisticated approach to organizational communication. Organizations as communication. But this means we have to think very differently about both communication and about organizations. Instead of viewing communication as merely the transfer of information, this second approach goes deeper and sees communication as the fundamental process that shapes our social reality. Communication is not just about transmitting already formed data between senders and receivers, but rather a complex process of continually creating and negotiating the meanings and interpretations that shape our lives. Scholars call this a constitutive view of communication, because communication literally constitutes or makes up our social world. More on this later. Additionally, this second approach of seeing organizations as communication questions the very notion of organization in the first place. The first approach of communication in organizations assumes there is this thing called organization that exists, and we just focus on the communication that happens inside. But what exactly is this thing called organization? Where did it come from? Organizations aren't natural. They don't just exist in nature like trees and mountains and rivers. They're created by people, and people have different values and motivations and abilities and resources. So organizations are never just neutral structures that exist apart from human activity. They are the visible manifestations of human activity, of communication. And so at their core, organizations are communicative. Think about it. An organization is essentially an ongoing collection of interactions, decisions, messages, interpretations, symbols, agreements, contracts, relationships, and so forth. There's nothing else there that exists apart from communication. Well, let me qualify that just a bit. Certainly there are other material or physical things there, like buildings, cubicles, computers, and other equipment, and these things help make up the organization. But these things have no inherent meaning apart from human interaction, nor can they have any impact in the real world apart from the choices we make through communication. Similarly, the outcomes of communication definitely have consequences in the material world. For example, you might be thinking, hey, if I get laid off, it's not just a matter of perception, it's not just talk. There's a stark reality I have to face. Yes, but how the decision to lay you off was made and the meaning of that decision, whether seen as cost-cutting efficiency or ruthless bottom-line thinking, and how you make sense of this event, are all matters of communication. And the accumulation of these communication processes are what make organizations what they are. I'm not suggesting that organizations exist in an imaginary land of perceptions and symbols and wishful thinking, like the material world doesn't matter, it's all in your mind. No. This constitutive perspective of organizations as communication is very much rooted in the material world of things and stuff. But what I am suggesting is that these material things come together and have meaning as an organization only through communication, thus leading us to the conclusion that organizations exist as communication. And my argument is that the second approach, organizations as communication, is a much better perspective to guide our study of organizational communication. Now, of course, we need effective communication within organizations. That's a given. But if we limit ourselves to only this perspective, we miss important opportunities for deeper insights and understanding. But why complicate things with a more sophisticated approach? After all, conventions become conventional for good reason, and conventional views have a lot of practical value. What do we gain with an alternative approach? I'm sure by now there are some objections in favor of the conventional view of communication within organizations I described earlier. After all, the container metaphor seems to describe how most of us actually experience organizational communication much of the time. And the physical reality of organizations, buildings, computers, stuff like that, seem to reinforce the conventional view. So what's wrong with this approach?